So, we want to solve the big problem first. What is the big problem? People are crazy. Now, I mean that in a very nice way. I mean that in a very sad way. I mean that in the way that people make themselves miserable in an unrelenting variety of desperate situations. Some people help other people to be miserable. Other people are usually supremely good at making themselves miserable. And I mean this in the sense of the Buddhist Four Noble Truths. The truth number one, we make ourselves miserable. Truth number two is, each particular circumstance and event of misery comes out of specific causes. The third noble truth is, each one of these causes can be removed, does not need to be there. And if the cause of the misery is removed, there is no misery. But each removal of misery is specific. There is a pattern overall to them, but they are specific. The miseries are specific in their coming. The miseries are specific in their cessation. In our releasing the attachments, the illusions and delusions which we hold dear, which we believe above and beyond what we may see in front of us, above and beyond what our connection to the world gives us. And this brings us to the big problem. Now, Buddhism and the Four Noble Truths, that's all well and good, but how did this happen? What is the underlying cause? When did we start to be this way? Is there a reason? And I think there is. I think it was 13,000 years ago, give or take. People started writing down the words that they were saying. And after a while, the words which were available to say were all written down. And when you were to learn a language, you had to learn the words which had been written. And even if you did not learn to read, it was the written language which you spoke and therefore which you thought in. Now, the part of your mind which thinks in that written language, I refer to as the intellect. It is the device driver which allows the mind to hear or read language, text, words, and translates that into feelings, emotions, feelings of the body, feelings of the mind. Sometimes that listening and understanding the meaning has changes in effect to the world. So in effect, the intellect has a set of ideas which are operated on as we listen to language. Operated on in the sense that what we hear, what we read, what we learn changes what we know about our world on a personal level, on a global level. The words that we have tell us what a global level is. It tells us what a personal level is. There's the language we speak with our family, the language we grow up with, the language we speak with our friends as we grow up. And in a real sense, there's a language which we use with every person that we know, because we remember for the majority of people, and the presumption is that we do remember as we meet people what it is we have discussed with them, so that we know where to pick up. There could be people that you haven't seen in years, but when you see them, it does not generally take very long to pick up where you left off. To a few remindings of the particular events in each other's lives that you last recall. And that's how we remember people. We remember people by remembering their stories. We remember their stories, and part of their stories are the other stories which they believe. We would remember where they were born, or where they grew up, where they lived a long time in their life, where they went, what they enjoyed as far as entertainment, what they believed in as far as a religion, what they believed in as far as science, what they understood in terms of technology, what they did for a living in terms of finances and economy and skills, who they knew, what music they liked, what sort of dancing they did. Do they write? What do they read? Do they read books? Do they read magazines? What's your favorite television show? What's the last movie that you saw? Do you own a television set? Each of those words, each of those phrases says something about who one is. Asking those questions says something about me, who is asking the question. Thinking about those questions and how to answer them for yourself changes your world a little bit. For you spend time, you repeat the words to yourself, you hear them and know what they mean, and that sends you into yourself. You cannot help but know what they mean, which means you cannot help but engage your intellect to take the words that you recognize and to process them and to understand them and to let the meanings, the emotional meaning, the physical meaning, ripple through you, from your ears, through your mind, through your body. That is what it is to be conscious with an intellect. Now, why is this a problem? What happened 13,000 years ago? Well, we started to think in a written language. What did we do before that? Well, if we call what we do thinking with a written language talking, we talk to each other and we talk to ourselves. We submit to ourselves a narrative of how the world works. And before, it was something that was not a written language. And I suspect that it was more like music, more like singing, more like thinking out loud, singing out loud. Now that's probably metaphorical, but there is a truth to it that gives a glimmer of what we may have lost by learning to think in a written language, by gaining the skill of a written language, which is absolutely powerful and became a necessary survival skill for every Homo sapien. Anyone who does not think in a written language today is mostly not here. Perhaps there are still some isolated tribes. I thought they were gone, but I heard about one recently. Okay, fine. But most of us, even those who did come from indigenous enclaves which did not have a written language, in order to communicate with the outside world, they had to learn a written language, a European language, or some other language with a tradition of literature and text. That is the big problem. Not that the language is a problem in itself, but to overestimate the importance of the language. In other words, to think that the text is actually more important than the mind, which makes it possible. The intellect is a small part, a software component of the mind, the software image of whatever it is that's going on inside the human consciousness amplifier we call our mind, our experience of consciousness as human beings. The mind overall, all of the variety of mental experience possible is far wider than the narrative which is possible through words. But because the words interact with the rest of the human world, they give us an image of the outside world, the image of the human culture, and then give us the image of our own story within that framework. And our self-worth is then measured by the story we can write to ourselves, that we can narrate and justify to ourselves, that we can rationalize as who we are, the best story we can come up with. And that is the story of our particular tragedy and misery, which brings us to the first noble truth. So if we understand that our mind is all of us, all of each of us, that our connection to what is real, whatever it is, to the numinous, to the infinite, is through our experience of the world, not through a set of words which might describe it, not through the intellect which just allows us to remove ourselves from the experience, from the senses themselves, from the whole mind experience of the world, and rather in a self-conscious set of culturally dependent and defined symbols, which ultimately mean something different to each person. Text means nothing in itself. It only means something when it is read. And then the reader will typically lie to themselves and read the words on the page, saying them back to themselves as if they were the writer of that text, pretending they are the author of the script they see in front of it. But what really occurs to them, what they really experience, is the words they say to themselves, not truly the words that are written on the page. If they were to misread a word in their story, it would be the word they say to themselves, not the one on the page. If they don't understand a word or think they understand a word, it may or may not be the intention and the connotation that the writer may have intended. The writer may have written that same text, or what we call the same text, in a different language, and it was then translated. So text is not useless, and thinking in a written language does not doom us. But our work is cut out for us to understand the many, many ways in which we misunderstand the world in favor of beliefs that our intellect has programmed into us through its understanding, its reading, its belief in text.